Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. This week, we're bringing you a special edition of the program where we'll be delving into the Iranian election. And it's been a rocky lead-up which has left many voters inside the Islamic Republic disillusioned. Let me break that down for you. A powerful body, that's the Guardian Council, has whittled down some 600 candidates to just over a handful. And by doing so, it's eliminated a number of prominent reformist faces who may have brought some rivalry to the race. Now, during the show, we'll be joined by Ali Vaez, who's the Crisis Group's Iran project director, and he'll be joining us from Washington. But before we speak to our guests, I'd like to look at another issue that will be contributing to what observers are calling a record low participation rate, and that's the state of the economy. Up until in March, the country was knee-deep in a 3-year recession with its inflation rate reaching 41%. The unemployment rate currently hovers at around 11%. And so, according to various polls, more than half of eligible voters are expected to stay away from those ballot boxes.
When Behnaz Shafiei became Iran's first ever female professional road racer, she shattered Iran's conservative social norms and inspired other Iranian women to do the same. But Shafiei says Iran's collapsing economy has made a career in racing harder than ever.
Can I get parts for my bike? Will they allow imports? Will I be able to get sponsors? Will relations improve with other foreign countries so that I can race?
This week, Shafiei and her fellow Iranians have a chance to choose one of 7 candidates to be Iran's next president. Each says they can fix Iran's economy, but Shafiei is skeptical.
This is what they've all said, but nothing's happened.
Shafiei says she has yet to decide if she will vote, but many Iranians have already decided not to vote due to authorities barring all leading reformist candidates and stacking the field with conservatives. Mehrab Kabuli is the head of an engineering firm in Tehran. He says he's staying home on election day.
Right now, I'm convinced that with the change in presidents, nothing noteworthy will happen, and the political situation cannot be reformed.
Kabuli says in recent years, 13 of his best employees have left the country due to the struggling economy, and no government has made things better. 30-year-old Sina Saremi still works at Kabuli's firm, but like many young Iranians, he still lives with his parents to make ends meet. Saremi says he's not voting either.
I have no hope about whoever is going to take the role. That's the catastrophe.
22-year-old Sara Danesh just graduated from college. With Iran's rampant unemployment, she doesn't expect to find work right away, and she doesn't expect a large voter turnout for this week's election.
We don't really feel the need to vote. Not much change is going to happen. Whoever is elected.
Whoever is chosen as Iran's next president faces a tall order, fixing a battered economy and winning back many Iranians who feel increasingly disenfranchised from the political process.
Let's now bring in our guest, Ali Vaez. Ali, it's great to have you with us again on France 24. What's Iran playing at here? You know, elections are traditionally really important for the leadership because for them, a high turnout secures legitimacy. But this time around, they're really not doing anything to quell this disenchantment, are they?
No, they're not, Sanam. You're absolutely right. Iranian elections were always unfree, unfair, but also unpredictable because there was a certain degree of competitiveness in these elections. But that seems to be changing because the system seems more interested in the outcome of the elections than the turnout, which, as you said, was a pillar of legitimacy. And I think this is because of 2 main reasons. One is the system has realized that in the bifurcated political system that exists in Iran, that both the office of the president and unelected institutions in Iran have executive authorities, and there's a lot of friction. The system is very dysfunctional if all levers of power are not in the hands of the same faction. That's number one. And number two, these elections are coming at a critical moment in the Islamic Republic's history when the supreme leader's succession is looming large on the horizon.
Ali, you mentioned a good point that we'll get back to it very shortly, but this is a critical moment as well for Iran's relationship with the international community. Could that also swing in either direction depending on who the president is?
So look, without any doubt, presidents matter in Iran's foreign policy. They select more than half of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, who plays a major role in designing and devising Iran's grand strategy. But there's also a degree of continuity from one government to another, because again, there are unelected institutions, most important among them the Supreme Leader's Office, who set the country's foreign policy agenda. And so on key strategic issues, I don't think things would change much. But on tone and tactic, they will definitely change.
That's really interesting, Ali. You said not much change there, and that takes us actually to our next report. I do want you to stand by. I'll come back to you very shortly. You know, Iran is an Islamic theocracy with this rather complicated power structure. And in this equation, our guest was just mentioning, you do have different systems. You have the supreme leader, you have the president, the parliament, that's Majlis, the judicial system, and frankly, the list goes on. Now, in this report, I take a look at how much power the Iranian president actually has. In the Islamic Republic, at the top of the power structure, we have the supreme leader, not the president. He remains subordinate to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and within that role, his powers are limited. In fact, according to the constitution, the president also doesn't have a say in matters like law enforcement. That falls in the hands of the judiciary, which is deemed an independent body, also largely controlled by the supreme leader. In addition to that, it's not the president of Iran, who is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but the highest power, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now comes another corker. While the president on paper nominates the country's ministers of intelligence, defense, and interior, their appointments need the green light from the supreme leader as well as the parliament. On top of that, it's Iran's Revolutionary Guards, the country's premier military force, who've been increasingly controlling the economy. That's 25 to 40% today, and not the presidency. This powerful body also controls the paramilitary Basij militia, which is vital to maintaining the Islamic Republic's influence on wider society. Now, you may be wondering, how much power does the Iranian president really have? Well, he heads the executive branch of the country, and while a change in president doesn't necessarily affect state policies, he does have some room for maneuver. An example of that was the initial success of the Iran nuclear deal during the Hassan Rouhani administration. But even in that case, the accord, also known as the JCPOA, needed that final stamp of approval from, you guessed it, the supreme leader. Up next, we have the Supreme National Security Council, the SNSC, which determines all foreign and national security policies. Now, that body is presided over by the president of the country. However, all the council's decisions must ultimately be confirmed by Ayatollah Khamenei. Last but not least, it's the foreign minister who recommends candidates for ambassadorial positions. Those have to be approved by the country's president. But there are, of course, as always, exceptions to this. It's the supreme leader who has the final say on posts in Damascus, Beirut, and Baghdad. Now, you may be wondering why I only use the pronoun he when speaking about the Iranian president and not she. The reason for that is because since the establishment of the Islamic Republic back in 1979, no woman has ever qualified to run for president. Ali Vaez, we just heard this report highlighting how much, or should I say how little power the president has. So what does that mean? Does that mean this election is just a farce, essentially?
No, not necessarily. The president plays an important role in managing the country's economy internally. It might have limited authority on foreign policy and defense, but on domestic affairs, it basically has the power of the purse. And manages the economy. And you can see the difference between different administrations, like Ahmadinejad, who presided over the highest oil income in Iran's history, but also the worst economic situation, and Rouhani, who has managed to keep the economy afloat despite devastating U.S. sanctions under President Trump's maximum pressure strategy. So it makes a difference.
It makes a difference. Earlier you mentioned something, I want to go back to it. You said that this election is somewhat more, you could say, about the issue of the succession of the supreme leader, that's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. What does that mean?
Well, there are a lot of people who assume that Mr. Raisi, who's the front runner, is being groomed by basically selecting him to become the next president of Iran to succeed the current supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who's 82 years old. There's another theory out there that maybe the system is actually selecting him as president to discredit him as a potential successor to the supreme leader, because most Iranian presidents end their terms in disgrace. Dealing with the country's numerous economic and socio-political challenges, as well as foreign policy challenges. But I don't think any of these two theories are entirely accurate. To be honest, I think the supreme leader would probably be reluctant to empower someone like Raisi, because the same thing that he did to kingmakers who elevated him to the office of supreme leader could happen to his family. And also, it really doesn't make sense to undermine one of the main pillars of the system's own legitimacy, which is the institution of elections, in order to just empower a government that you want to watch fail. So all in all, it's really difficult to predict what's the real intention here. But my own guess is that this is part of consolidation in the run-up to succession.
Ali, very briefly, in 30 seconds, if you can, do you see this ballot as a turning point for Iran?
I think it is an important turning point because the system is losing its popular legitimacy. There's a huge sense of hopelessness in the society. And if the more monolithic government that comes to office in August fails to really address the country's deep structural problems, then this hopelessness could give its place to frustration and anger on the streets.
Let's wait and see. Ali Vaez of the Crisis Group, I can't thank you enough for, as always, sharing your very important insights with us here on Middle East Matters. And thank you for watching. Stay tuned.